Welcome back to Dateline New Haven and WNHH-FM. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Well, we have an unusual guest today. I'll tell you why he's unusual. In New Haven, every 4 years we vote in state elections. But we never have anyone on the ballot to vote for, at least since 2006, who actually comes from New Haven. But this year, a New Havener has made it to the ballot at a major party. His name is Erick Russell. He's the Democratic candidate for state treasurer, and he's here in the studio. Hi, Erick. Great to see you.
Great to see you too, Paul. How you doing?
Good. It's been, when were you last here, like 3 years ago?
About that, I believe so. Shortly before COVID. So.
You were involved in a lot of Democratic politics, doing law, and people say you got to interview this guy, Erick, because he's an up-and-comer. You weren't even 30 yet, right? They said this guy's like going to be going places in the party. You didn't have elected office yet. You were like vice chair of the state party.
Vice chair, yep.
And now, look, you had a crowded field. The state treasurer job came open, and you're now in line possibly to become one of the constitutional officers of the state of Connecticut.
That's right. That's right. I'm excited about the opportunity and the opportunity to continue on a lot of the good work that's been done and the progress that we're making as a state.
So the state treasurer is responsible for overseeing Connecticut's nearly $45 billion in pension and trust assets. Big job. I never understood why it's elected, but I guess it's elected in every state. Do you know why that is?
It is, but I think it's broader than just that role, and I think that that's part of it, right? It's about obviously managing our pension funds. It's about protecting state and municipal employees and teachers and retirees and their pensions. It's also all of our debt management, so all of our bonding and investment around the state, all of our cash management, and then programs like CT Big List and our second injury fund, unclaimed property. So
S-Sheets. I love that word, ESCHEATS.
Yeah.
Do I say it right, or is it S-Sheets?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's like when no one's touched the bank account for like 10 years or whatever.
Correct. So, and then those monies are being held by the state. There's a process, and so anyone who is actually interested, there's a website called CT Big List.
That's what
you
Big
go
List
on
is.
and you plug your information in, and if there is any outstanding assets that you have out there, there's a process by which you can receive that back from the state.
Okay, so why do you think this needs to be elected?
Because there's huge opportunities to, in addition to responsible fiscal management of our state and responsible investment in our pension funds, to really use this office to help people in our state. And that's one thing have obviously been passionate about for a long time. And I think this is a great opportunity to use this role. Paul, as you know, I grew up here in New Haven, working in my parents' small convenience store on Congress Avenue in New Haven. Watched my parents really sacrifice a lot, and the community I grew up in, people working really hard trying to make ends meet and provide better opportunities for themselves and their families. And I'm excited about, in addition to, again, the responsible fiscal management and investment in our pension funds, also looking for opportunities to provide economic growth and upward mobility for all of our communities across the state. And I think bringing that real lived experience and perspective to this role, in addition to my professional experience and career, that it really lends itself to me stepping into this spot.
Specifically, how do you promote economic growth and opportunity through the treasurer's office? And is it how you steer, like target investments or other funds that you manage?
So it's not just investments. It's, again, the breadth of this role is significant, right? And so when you think about the treasurer's role, you also sit on dozens of boards and commissions and quasi-public agencies, everything from the Connecticut Airport Authority to the Connecticut Health and Educational Facilities Authority to the Social Equity Council that was just developed.
Was that for cannabis?
Correct. And so with all of these...
They're not doing that great on that, are they?
Well, but the point is that the role of treasurer,
right,
that you have a position to really weigh in on
and
all
college
of these
savings, right? Don't you also run a college savings program?
The CHEP program is all through the treasurer's office. So, you know, I think this role often gets framed as being very narrow, I think in part because of other folks who may be running for the office that, you know, want to frame it as being aligned directly with their experience. But there isn't a lot of discussion about the much broader responsibilities. I think the other piece is that, you know, there are opportunities to weigh in on policy. And as you've seen with Treasurer Wooden, whether it be our divestment from civilian gun manufacturers to advocating for baby bonds, which is a program that is directly designed to really help close the racial and generational wealth gap in this state. You as an elected official have a platform, and you have an opportunity to use your voice to really advocate for things that are important to the overall fiscal health of the state, the growing economy, but for really advocating for working people.
Erick Russell of New Haven is the Democratic candidate for state treasurer on November 8th. He's here on Dateline New Haven, 103.5 FM. So I guess one issue, Harry Aurora is your opponent. He's a Republican.
Correct.
And he says because he has actually run an investment fund and made state laws, he thought that is a better resume for the job. And again, you're saying that's too narrowly defining the job as just investing assets, the pension funds and the debt. But even on that question, is he right that we should have someone who's managed an investment fund, or do you have experience that's just as relevant?
So I think I have the broad-based experience that really best suits me to step into this role. But I think the other thing that's important is I'm not running to be chief investment officer of the state treasury. I'm running to be treasurer and to set the tone for this office and the overall vision, and to make sure that we are moving our state forward and that working people across this state have a voice in the treasurer's office. We have a pension fund management group within the office. We have a chief investment officer. We have an investment advisory council. We work with outside investment managers. My 10 years of experience in finance, representing local and state government, state agencies in financing, working with investors and underwriters and rating agencies, really allows me to step into this role on day one and get to work. And a lot of that experience has been directly through the treasurer's office.
So what kind of work have you done for towns and state agencies?
So I'm a partner at my law firm in our public and private finance group. And every day I represent municipalities and state agencies, the state of Connecticut, in debt management and financing of critical infrastructure across the state. And I've also done that with state agencies. So projects, whether it be for the Connecticut Airport Authority or for universities and healthcare institutions across the state. I've also, again, represented underwriters and trustees. And a lot of that work has been doing many of the things that the treasurer's office is responsible for, maintaining our strong ratings, working with rating agencies. And so, again, this broad-based experience, again, and also understanding that there are components of law that come into this role. There are policy components. It's really about combining all of these skill sets and really leading the office and setting the vision and the tone.
So it sounds like
office.
you have a two-part answer. Your first answer sounds like, if I have you right, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You're saying, in my work for 10 years working with towns and with state agencies and quasi-public agencies, actually the same work. You're saying that, like, if you're working with ratings agencies, if you're doing underwriting, you're doing bond offerings, that's actually the work.
That is the work of absolutely.
But you're also saying it's not all the work. Your chief investment officer is actually a position in there, is crunching the numbers every day.
Correct.
You need to be in a position to be able to analyze that through your experience, but also set a tone and a vision for where the office should go.
You need to be able to collaborate with leaders and staff within the office and outside folks that we bring in as consultants to make the best decision for the state of Connecticut. And my skill set very much lends itself to doing that.
Erick Russell running for treasurer. So one way, I think you and he might disagree, let's see, is on, you said it's not just narrowly an investment job. So he says, though I have to ask and get back and make sure I have it right. I said, treasurers in the country now, state treasurers on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican, are looking to create larger goals, right? They want to say we can get best possible returns for our money. Absolutely. And have that money work for people. So Republican state treasurers have formed a national organization where they're actually punishing investment firms if they want to deal with climate change. They've pulled $700 million, just 3 state treasurers, West Virginia, Louisiana, Arkansas, out of BlackRock, which is no goody-goody firm, but because they thought the firm was too focused on environmental issues. Republican state treasurer Idaho and Utah, they're pressuring what they call woke corporations, meaning that they factor in climate change into investments. Pennsylvania, Arizona, Oklahoma want to thwart the nominations of federal regulators who want to require that banks disclose financial risks of a warming planet. So that's what the conservative Republican treasurers want to do. And then you have embraced the idea of doing progressive goals with investments. You want to steer them toward in-state companies, away from corporations responsible for climate change and opioid addiction, and have a fund established financial assistance for people traveling to Connecticut for abortions, and that you want to work with other state treasurers to do that. Is that Aurora said that on both sides that's outside the role? That his role is to produce so much money in returns that then the legislature, which is supposed to set policy, can accomplish those goals.
So I'll address the kind of socially responsible investment and then the Safe Harbor Fund, which was a policy that I developed in conjunction with some other folks throughout the campaign. The socially responsible investment piece, I think first and foremost, everyone should understand that the role of treasurer, you have a fiduciary obligation to maximize returns on your investments. Talking about what is, it's called ESG, right? So environmental, social governance. It has now become this political football, which it had never been.
Sort of
ESG
like
has been
social emotional learning.
Exactly.
Well, it's become political football because the right has used it as a talking point. It has also been rejected by some outlets that do believe in social responsibility, like The Economist magazine, says that ESG ends up not working because they greenwash. Investors, everyone says they're being environmentally, socially responsible, but often those elements of ESG conflict with each other. So Elon Musk fails on every score on the social governance part, but he's building electric cars. So is he ESG? They thought that should all be broken down. It should just be E for environmental.
Well, I think the broader point is ESG has been used for decades. It's just all ESG is about is analyzing risk to your portfolio when you're making investments, understanding that environmental issues and governance issues and companies that have bad social practices expose themselves to liabilities, right, that you may take on as an investor. And so where it has become more of a political football is, again, I think what you said is the term is being used or thrown around as something that is negative inherently.
Funded by coal companies and oil companies who just want to have pressure not to divest.
And factoring in ESG, the response to that isn't just divestment, right? A lot of the opportunity for the treasurer to really make an impact as far as where we are invested is the fact that you have a seat at the table. And that divestment, it really is should be the last resort. I think the other thing is when we have divested, there's always been a priority to the fiduciary priority first. So Treasurer Wooden taking the step to divest from civilian gun manufacturers. There was outside analysis. There was a fiduciary study done before this decision was made, and it was passed then through the legislature, understanding that that was not going to be harmful to our portfolio.
In other words, he was there to make the case that if we divest from these gun manufacturers, we're not going to lose a penny.
Correct.
There are other good investors. But right now, if you're doing short term, the oil companies are doing quite well.
Yeah, but I think the other thing that's important to remember is that as a pension fund, we are long-term investors. We are not looking at 1 or 3 year windows of time, analyzing that as being our overall goal. We are looking for returns on a long-term basis. And so when you think about things like the environment, when you think about things like climate change, knowing where we are going, looking at a strategic plan for how we move away from fossil fuels, understanding that that is probably something long-term that is going to benefit our pension fund. And so to be very clear, my first priority is making sure that we are maximizing returns and we are growing our pension funds. I think there are opportunities in this office, whether it be through the due diligence process, whether it be through our kind of seat at the table with companies that we invest in, there's opportunity to make sure that we are driving good social policy.
Is it almost now we have to apologize for the way the word liberal became dirty in the 80s? Do you have to apologize for caring about ESG?
Well, no, I mean, again, I think
having your money
through this political,
as well as
good. And I think as long as we're talking about it in a political cycle where people can use it as something that's negative, that's what you're dealing with.
You have to come out there and say, I'm not going to cost it any money.
But I think the first, the first priority is growing our pension funds.
And what about the ESG critique coming from The Economist, that it really should just be E? That it's too easy to have some of these grading groups give points for companies that then do so badly on other scores that it's a while. Is that just a matter of finding the right? Do you have like a preferred rating group for ESG that you look at?
No, I don't think that. And I think you kind of have to analyze this on where you're going. But I think if you talk about governance, for instance, if we're investing in emerging markets and you're not going to factor in their governance policies, you are exposing yourself to liability. And so I think this is all about mitigating risk to our pensioners. It's not a term that's just about investing in a way that feels good.
All right. And Eric Russell, I'm sorry, yes, Eric.
No, just wanted to hit the safe harbor fund that you mentioned. So that is kind of a separate concept that's less about our investments. It would be the proposal would be under the purview of the Treasurer's office, because the idea is that the funds sitting in that safe harbor fund would be invested by the Treasurer. But this was through conversations with legislators, with nonprofit organizations and stakeholders, understanding that right now we have a situation where we have anti-choice states across the country where women and people can't get access to the reproductive health care that they need. And this would be an opportunity for Connecticut to be a safe harbor in that respect, for there to be resources, understanding that Black and brown women, folks from lower socioeconomic status, members of the LGBTQ community are the ones that are going to be most impacted by these laws. And that we have an opportunity to create a broader network where women and patients can go and seek the care that they need safely and compassionately.
Erick Russell, Aurora, your opponent, also says that the mix of investments is wrong. That he wants to go more 50%, I think, for like stock and bond that aren't the high risk stock and bond. What's your take on that?
So again, for many of the numbers and bits of information that are being thrown out there from my opponent, I don't know where some of it is actually coming from. And I know when speaking specifically about the asset allocation, that a lot of that information is completely outdated. The Treasurer's Office went through a strategic asset allocation this year that was, again, done with the Treasurer, with the Chief Investment Officer, with outside advisors, and then ultimately was approved by the Investment Advisory Council. And so our asset allocation was recently restructured in a way that is meant to obviously maximize returns and to benefit our pension portfolio. So, I don't know exactly what, he's speaking to, but I think that this is something that we need to continue to do regularly, is obviously analyze where we are as far as our overall allocations to make sure that we're maximizing return for our pensioners. Do
you have a favorite moment on the trail so far? I mean, it must be weird running for state treasurer, because unless I'm wrong, I would guess that most people don't think about state treasurer. I haven't heard. Like, it's your first step. Hey, let me tell you what I'm running for.
Yeah,
why it matters.
Listen, it's once people have an idea of what the treasurer is responsible for, people take interest because it's a really critical role. And so it's been exciting to kind of inform folks. I think particularly, what's been most exciting for me, being a younger person running for office, being someone who hasn't spent their career in elected office, being someone who grew up in New Haven with little means and, really is connected to, I think, what a lot of working families in this state are experiencing and going through. It's been really exciting to see folks feeling like they're represented, and
people like someone new and someone where they're from.
Listen, Sean Scanlon and I, if elected, would be the first millennials elected to statewide office in the state. I think people are excited about seeing new leadership stepping up and using their voice. Also understanding that a lot of these issues that we are talking about long term in our state are impacting young folks and young families in the state. So, that has been really exciting to me. We have
my generation is horrible about stepping aside, and the generation even older than us, like I'm a hey boomer. And like, we just don't make room. I mean, people have these jobs for 20, 30 years, for leadership, and it hurts our community.
Listen, we have some people who have been there for a long time too, who are doing incredible work, right? And so, I mean, I think that's what this really comes down to.
Everybody in Congress and Biden running against Trump, those are people who are like been in ARP for a quarter century,
We haven't, but listen,
McConnell, Pelosi.
Yeah, again, I think there's people who have done great work, and people feel comfortable with that steady.
So you're saying it needs to be a mix, just to have a little all voices in it.
And I'm really fortunate. I feel like we're running with an incredible team. Our slate is diverse and has a lot of different experiences, all very competent and capable, but ultimately understand what this election is really about. And we've made great progress. I think in these election cycles, sometimes when there is a drive to change leadership, it's done by bashing where we are or ignoring progress that we've made. If you look at, obviously, running for treasurer, care about our overall fiscal health. And over the last 4 years, 4 balanced budgets, we have a full rainy day fund upwards of $3 billion, one of the largest tax cuts in the state's history targeted at working and middle-class families. And we've paid down nearly $6 billion of unfunded pension liability, which is huge. It's saving taxpayers upwards of $450 million every year. And it's something that we have kicked the can down the road on for decades and decades and decades. And we're finally in a spot where we're addressing that. We've seen 3 or 4 upgrades to our bond rating over the last few years because outside folks see that we are getting our fiscal house in order and that we're moving in the right direction and that we have the right controls in place to continue us on that path. And so I'm excited to continue us on that journey, understanding that is what will continue to allow us to invest in education and housing and lowering costs for working people. in a time where people are really struggling with, global inflation being where it is and, costs being increased for.
Now, remind
folks.
me, there was a milestone you mentioned before that you'd be the first, was it LGBT person of color in a statewide office in the country? What was the milestone?
Yeah, so that was brought to our attention. We received the endorsement of the Victory Fund, which is a national LGBTQ rights organization. And they informed me upon the endorsement that I would, if elected, I'd be the first black, openly gay, statewide elected official in the country's history.
How could that be?
And I know it, but you think back, we just had the first black LGBT member of Congress elected a few years back in Mondaire Jones and Richie Torres. So, again, it's a sign of the progress that we have made as a country and as a state, but there's also plenty of work to do. And I look forward to the times when that's not a headline or something important.
Are we going backwards on that nationally, or is it just when the arc of history bends toward justice, it doesn't bend every minute? It goes back one step when you go ahead three. Is this the because, you read surveys of young evangelical Christians who might be conservative. Mm-hmm. They're much more open to LGBTQ communities and rights because they know people and it's more in the open. So that's one reason for optimism. But you also look at this backlash now, especially with trans. I mean, Republicans are getting elected on this issue now. So where do you see that issue going in this country?
I think we're making progress. I think we've seen there are more LGBTQ candidates running for office right now than ever before. But I think part of that is out of necessity, right? It's understanding that there are communities that are under attack, right? And that there's opportunities now to use your voice and to step up and be that advocate for communities like that we need. And so, it's an exciting time. I think when you see a lot of progress really quickly, you always see a lot of pushback. And I think that's some of what we're dealing with. And but I think people are going to step up.
For all people like me, the arc history is amazing on this, because when we were pushing for civil unions just 20 years ago, and that got so much pushback, it didn't seem possible that gay marriage would be legalized by a conservative Supreme Court. So, yeah.
Well, and it's important right now with the makeup of the Supreme Court and with many of the attacks that we've seen to many of the rights that folks have taken for granted for so long. It's a reminder that we all have an obligation to step up and continue the fight. And this is going to be the tip of the iceberg. I mean, the courts have very clearly said where they're going. First, it was a woman's right to choose. It's going to be marriage equality. It's going to be access to contraceptives, you name it. And it was all spelled out. And until we have the right people in elected office who are going to make decisions to actually protect those rights and advocate for people who need that support, we got to keep it up. So,
all right, well, keep it up, Erick Russell. Thanks for joining us on Dateline New Haven today. Erick's the Democratic Party candidate for state treasurer, first New Havener on a major party ticket since 2006. Although Hank Parker was the state treasurer for many years, from New Haven, the 60s and 70s, early 80s. Any final word, 5-second elevator pitch for voting?
No, you can check out my website, Erick for CT. I think, this is really an important election. It's about getting out there and voting. Feel free to reach out with any questions, or to touch base. But I think my experience, my lived experience and perspective, I'm ready to jump into this role and know who I'm advocating for. So I look forward to it.
Thanks for joining us, Erick Russell.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harry Droz, for personing the controls. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.